Our first question is for Tram. And what is next for the MOBI community, and what can you tell us about your projected roadmap?
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, good afternoon, good early evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We, as you know, started out as a standard body, and since 2019, which was our first standard, the MOBI vehicle identity, we have produced 13 blockchain-based standards. 2021 alone, we had 9 of them. Many of them was authored by Rajat, who's on the panel with me today. So I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about them. While we think our standards are great, at the end of the day, they are just standards with writing on paper. And to create monetization opportunities for our members, we have started implementing them and building the digital infrastructure for multi-party pilot. So 2022 is all about implementation and pilot to show that the technology is scalable for multi-party ecosystem. And I'm sure we'll hear much more about them as the hour progresses. And
muted. Thanks, Tram. So our next question is for Rajat. You are the lead author for the MOBI Trusted Trip standard. What is it, and how does it fit into other MOBI initiatives?
Thank you, Kelly, and good morning, good afternoon. So in a very simple layman terms, trusted trip is a concept that a trip performed by any entity, so that entity can be a person, it could be a device, it can be verified by any other entity without a need for a centralized third party. Essentially, it builds on another concept called a decentralized ID or self-sovereign identity. Recently, as last year, W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, put out a standard for creation and management of DIDs and verifiable credentials. So basically followed that particular standard and added location to it. So trusted trip is very much related to verification of location. Because of that, mobility is so much reliant on verification of location, whether it's a person's location or a shipment or parts or what have you. So trusted trip is we call it a key primitive for many of our multi-party use cases that involves anything to do with verification of location.
Great, thank you. So our next question is for Chris. And what do you think is the possible future of mobility in blockchain? And why do you think that future should involve blockchain? And would blockchain become another choice in addition to services we have now, or could it change mobility completely? I think you may be muted, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. So the mobility future is certainly very bright. And blockchain is essential. Why? Connected cars have an enormous amount of processing. They have an enormous amount of sensors. To make them useful, the latency, speed, and security necessary requires the transaction processing to be at the edge, not in centralized servers, not up in the cloud, but at the edge. Edge requires edge computing in IoT, particularly with roving devices, requires identities. Blockchain is the secure registry for IoT identities for edge devices. And that allows every moving connected thing, whether it's a car, a package, a part, a drone, whatever, to have a secure identity, to be intelligent, and to transact autonomously with other things. And that opens up a new kind of mobility, a pay-per-use that's $1 trillion, certainly $1 trillion, a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem. And that type of autonomy, autonomous transactions, vehicle-to-vehicle commerce, initiated by the car as agent or by the roving device as agent, will probably be bigger, more disruptive, certainly arrive sooner, and be more valuable than the autonomous driving itself that everybody talks about. So the future's bright.
Great, thank you. So right now we have some time for audience questions. And just as a reminder to everyone that joined a little bit later, you can submit questions in the chat to everyone throughout the entire panel presentation. So while our panel is answering questions, feel free to submit any that pop up into the chat. Looks like we don't have any now. Did the panel want to elaborate on any questions, or are we ready to move on to more questions?
We can move on.
Okay, great.
I think we have lots of questions that were submitted in advance, so we might as well go to those.
Yeah.
Okay. We have one audience question, a couple actually. Is Moby keeping its initial focus on ground vehicles, or is it doing things in aerospace as well?
I can start that, and then Chris can talk about it also. In 2019, yes, we had actually a joint meeting with the aerospace industry, and we've been talking with the aerospace industry for a while, and we continue to share our progress. What is the latest conversation on that, Chris?
They're still interested. It makes perfect sense. I think there's a number of places where the identities that we've come up with for roving vehicles, the trusted trip, fit into aerospace. Just one obvious one, drones. With widespread drone use and delivery, airspace is going to become congested. It's going to have to be rationed. How do you do that? You have to have a real-time identity, a real-time trip, and a pricing mechanism probably, and coordination to do that. Trusted trip fits it perfectly. Pay-per-use for airspace is really the same technology, the same process as pay-per-use for roads. Congestion pricing on the ground is the same as congestion pricing in the air. So it's perfectly extensible. Very good fit.
Great. So I think we'll answer one more audience question, and then we'll go back to our submitted questions, and we can revisit audience questions in a bit. So our next one is, what extent does this platform or the standard fit into commercial trucking?
Kelly, the question from Will, he also submitted a question on the website, and I think we have like 3 or 4 after the question to talk about the trucking and heavy duty truck manufacturing involvement. So let's cover that when you come to that question.
Sure. All right. So then for Tram, which token will be used to fulfill the goals of Moby?
From the beginning, we have always said that Moby is vendor, technology, and token agnostic. So what that means is that if you have money to spend, we want you. What we want to, at the end of the day, be able to accept any fiat currency, any bank instrument, private or government issued stable tokens. We have no ambition to create a global digital currency. So if I have a Bitcoin and you have a Litecoin, I still want your money. And we are trying to do it that way.
Great. So Chris, this next one is for you. What value proposition do insurance carriers have to join Moby?
The opportunity for the insurance industry in this space is really incredible. The existing collision casualty liability for mobility is based on, in most parts of the world, is based on sort of asking the insured a few questions. What's your gender? Where do you garage the car? How many miles do you put on it? and most of the questions, are difficult to verify, put it that way. So the industry is looking at usage-based insurance, trying to get better information for underwriting the driver and accident risk. The trusted trip fits perfectly into that. The trusted trip would allow usage-based insurance, real usage-based insurance for the first time. True marginal cost pricing for risk could vastly decrease the costs of fraud, misrepresentation, uncertainty. The MOBI is doing multi-party pilots, so we would have a platform for insurance companies to come in and run multi-party pilots where they can share risk information while protecting their insured's privacy. In terms of vehicle data itself, the identity standards of vehicle 1 and particularly vehicle 2 get at the issue of what's the real value of the car, sort of solving the lemons issue. One of the problems for insurance companies is when there's a total loss, the insured always thinks that the vehicle is worth more than the insurance company. Insurance companies end up paying a lot more probably than they need to if they had better information about what the shape of the car was, how many miles were on it, what equipment was installed, and things like that. So those are a few things. There's a lot more. The ability to do underwriting pools, proof of insurance, proof of genuine parts in repairs, that repairs were done correctly, certification. These are all things that would have immense value for the insurance industry and can be done today with MOBI members in the multi-party pilots that we're running as part of the DRIVES program.
All right, our next question, thanks, Chris, is for Rajat, and it's about trucking, like we discussed. So someone wants to know, what is the involvement of heavy-duty truck OEMs in MOBI and how MOBI could revolutionize the trucking industry? And in addition, what is MOBI's interaction and relationship with other standard organizations such as SAE and IEEE?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I would just start by saying that MOBI's first standard, which is a vehicle identity, related to vehicle identity, actually applies to trucks as well, because the same way the cars have VIN numbers, trucks do too. So that by that extension, the other standards like trusted trip also applies to trucks. Our supply chain working group is working on a pilot for track and trace of high value automotive parts upstream and downstream of the supply chain. Part of that workflow involves logistics companies, as well as trucking companies, because they are the ones that are physically moving those parts up and down the supply chain. So we do consider logistics, not only heavy trucks, but any form of logistics modes into the supply chain pilot. And the other standards like electric vehicle grid integration, uses-based insurance, vehicle identity, which I just talked about, finance and securitization, all of those standards apply to trucking and logistics in general. So it's very much aligned with what we're doing. Although we don't have, there's a question from Will about our heavy duty manufacturers and suppliers involved in your standards collaboration. We don't have heavy vehicle manufacturers. We did have a couple of conversations. There is a conversation going on with a truck manufacturer. I'm not sure I can reveal the name. But we do have several part suppliers like Denso, who is very active in our standards development, and I believe they provide parts to trucks as well. With regards to SAE and IEEE, they're both members of MOBI. We do talk to them occasionally. So yeah, so all of those questions came out at the same time. So those are the answers.
Great, thank you. So we can just continue on with submitted questions so that we don't answer duplicate questions. And then at the end, we can read through our chat questions. But be sure to keep submitting them in the chat as well. So our next question is for Chris. Does MOBI anticipate the formation of any additional working groups?
So yes, so MOBI is member funded and member directed. So we'll do working groups wherever our members have interest in where they think there are commercial opportunities and they want to get together and do multi-party standards and multi-party pilots. We've formed working groups in two ways, either sort of de novo based on some new vertical that our members are interested in, or as an extension of an existing working group. An example of an extension that we did in the past was the VID2. So the Vehicle Identity 1, VID1 was about all the specs of a car when it's produced, the vehicle birth certificate. VID2 came later, and it was about everything that happens to the car in its life, in its ownership and use. That probably will happen with the electric vehicle to grid, EV to grid working group. I think there's so much interest in batteries and electric vehicles that it's logical to just restart that and do another stage on that. Do some additional standards and pilots around that. And then there's totally new working groups. The one we've had teed up for a while and we'll probably launch sometime when we get critical mass around it is logistics. So yes, we'll have additional working groups and they'll always be whatever our members are interested in. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. So our next question is about standards for Tram. Is MOBI working on new standards, and how do these standards fit together or build off each other?
Thanks, Kelly. Yes, we always continue to work on standards as long as we exist, I think. And the next standard we are working on is the battery identification number, or we call it the BIN number standard, similar to our vehicle identity. And also we are working on the universal device birth certificate standard with empty field so that subject matter experts can fill in the information. Secure identity is the first step in Web3 connected vehicle and IoT commerce. So therefore, we are working hard on those. And these standards build on each other. For example, the ones I just spoke about build on the MOBI Trusted Trip standard, which links, like as you heard from Rajat, an identity's decentralized identity with its timestamp location into a verifiable trip, which opens up a lot of usage based mobility cases.
Great. So our next question is for Rajat. Are there any hardware requirements or specifications for V2V interfaces envisioned in MOBI standards?
Yeah, we do envision creating hardware spec at some point, but we don't have that right now. But Tram mentioned something that we just started working on, which is the universal device birth certificate. And especially regarding the creation of decentralized ID, which is what's tied to the birth certificate of devices. And so our focus right now is creating standards for those decentralized IDs of devices, which is essential to build any other use cases on top of it. And so once we build the decentralized ID of devices, then we can unlock a lot of different use cases on top of it, whether that's for V2V, V2X, or V2I. So in blockchain, it's the identity is essential, and decentralized ID and use of verifiable credentials is essential also for the trusted trip. And decentralized ID is a very new topic. So there's a lot of academic work is being done on it, and we're following those standards as they come out. They're evolving pretty rapidly, So once we are very comfortable with, how do we use these standards, especially regarding to identities on blockchain, then it'll be a lot easier for us to unlock other use cases, especially V2X, because V2X is has to ensure that the data coming from other vehicles or roadside infrastructure is secure and can be trusted.
Great. So we have another question for you, Rajat. Has Moby done any work developing standards for commercial vehicles and V2V, V2X? If so, what are some potential applications for state DOTs and other agencies wanting to use vehicle identity technologies for commercial vehicle screening, tolling, and more?
Yeah, so like I said, our vehicle identity standard applies to all types of vehicles, including trucks. We don't have a specific standard for V2X. There are lots of work that's already been done by US DOT for the past 10 years. We're certainly going to borrow some of that, some of the work that's been already done, and we want to see how blockchain fits into those standards, especially the use of trusted trip and DIDs. We do intend to begin work in this space. Obviously, like Chris mentioned, we're member driven. So if there's a need, then we'll certainly start a working group or two working groups. Just as an example of working with tolling and VMT and RUC, we are in discussion with EasyPass. They've agreed to be part of various working groups. And we're also in conversation with Oregon DOT for road usage charging, because the Moby Trusted Trip fits perfectly in that for that kind of use case.
Great, thank you.
And by the way, Oregon DOT is giving a lecture on the Community Innovation Lecture Series too, so come back for that.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah, that's available on our website, so be sure to register. So Tram, this next question is for you. Can you tell us more about Moby's Web3 digital infrastructure?
Yes. So in the new economy of movement, as we branded and call it such, we do believe that Web3 federated networks and decentralized platforms are needed to manage trusted identity. So therefore enabling trusted data sharing and business automation. Moby's Web3 digital infrastructure and the whole thing consists of 3 member-owned and operated layers for transaction validation between connected identities. We call this the Moby technology stack. And what they are is the foundational layer is made up of Moby consortium, where the standards are being produced. And then the middle layer, we call it mobiNET, which is to issue and manage decentralized identities. And then the top layer is Citopia, where is a decentralized platform for onboarding the identities, issue the verified credentials. So essentially the Moby Trusted Trip is enabled on Citopia, and also from that will enable payment for usage-based mobility services. And we'll talk more about these initiatives because there's a lot of questions submitted for them also.
Definitely. Thanks, Tram. And our next question is for Chris. And was creating the Citopia platform always part of the plan for Moby? And how did the idea for Citopia come about?
So always part of the plan. I guess you can trace it back a long way, although it wasn't called Citopia. You can go back to the Turing lecture given by Mike Hearn in 2014. For those who don't know Mike was an early Bitcoin developer and currently is the chief architect developer for the R3 consortium. But Mike gave a lecture where one of the examples he used of autonomous things transacting directly was vehicles, and I think you can still find that on YouTube somewhere. Mike Hearn Turing lecture, So that's sort of what was one inspiration of it. But even farther back in the original paper on smart contracts, which predates Bitcoin by 15 or 20 years, Nick Szabo talked about vehicles locks operating according to smart contracts. So, a lot of people have been talking about these kinds of, autonomous vehicle transactions for a long time. What happened in MOBI and was really Tram kicked off the vehicle smart city angle, thinking about how do vehicles interact with infrastructure, how do they transact, paper use. She named it. She came up with the name Citopia for it to link it to sort of that smart city angle. Hired a development team to build a map-based interface for smart city mobility. And that was around late 2018, beginning 2019. She officially launched it in a lecture she gave at in Munich at our MoCo Munich it was hosted by BMW in February of 2019. So no, it wasn't always there. It was gestating in the community, and Tram really took it and ran with it.
Thanks, Chris. I paid him to say that.
So our next question is for you, Tram. What do you think the value proposition of Cytopia is from the perspective of the average commuter?
The privacy preserving is the main thing that a lot of average commuter, when they are surveyed, say that the data privacy is important to them. The second thing is seamless mobility from modal to modal, and Citopia will be able to enable both data privacy and seamless transportation. What that means is that the consumer can do trip planning and ticketing and payment all from the same platform. Instead of having to have multiple transit cards or multiple apps that you have to open in your cell phone to be able to connect, to go from let's say Los Angeles to San Diego, and be able to do it in one platform. I think that's what the value proposition for the average commuter.
Great. So another Cytopia question for you, Tram. There are multiple Cytopia dApps and many or sub-platforms in the pipeline, like Cytopia Mass and Multimodal, Parts Track, and more. Can you explain how each of these dApps and platforms connect to the main Cytopia platform? Like, is there a structural hierarchy or something like that?
Yes. So I think for those of you who've been receiving our bulletin, you have heard words like Citopia Mass Multimodal, Citopia Parts Track, and Citopia VinTrack. These are essentially all decentralized apps or mini platforms, and they are all connected to Citopia. And think of Citopia as a platform for decentralized app. So like Google Play or Apple App Store, however, and these are truly decentralized. They will be community owned and is going to enable Web3 vendors to be able to connect directly to the end user and offer services and products without going through the middleman.
Great, thanks, Tram. Another question for you, Tram. How will mobiNET, DID scalability pilot for the European Commission tailpipe emissions tracking pilot impact emissions tracking overall? What value does it bring?
Yes, so I think you also, again, if you get our mail, we recently publicized that we are working with EU Commission on a scalability identity pilot. As mentioned a few times now, secure identity is needed for autonomous transaction. So the first step in tailpipe emission or any kind of managing of any kind of data is secure identity. Once you have secure identity, then you can have accurate digital MRV, which is monitoring, reporting, and verifying of emission of greenhouse emission to ensure that the data can be trusted and therefore mitigated. You can't manage what you can't measure. So that's what we're trying to do. This pilot is just the initial step. We'll continue to work with governments around the world for solutions to manage mobility emissions towards a circular economy.
Great, thanks, Tram. Our next question is for Chris. What do you anticipate will be the most valuable use case for smart and connected mobility in the short term, like 3 to 5 years, and then also the long term?
Yeah, near term, the use cases largely revolve around DID registries, so identities for things, and being able to use that secure identity in trusted commerce and business automation networks. Long term, certainly V2X commerce, where the vehicle or package or part is acting as an autonomous agent, transacting independently, paying for its use, paying for its charging, getting paid for being off-grid, decentralized storage to the grid, these kinds of things. So that's the multi-trillion-dollar transaction economy that we've called the new economy of movement. And long term, that's the just the massive ecosystem and economy.
Great, thank you. So Rajat, we have another question for you. What new use cases is the Drives Program Working Group considering to work on next?
So for people who are not familiar with the Drives program, it's kind of an implementation working group where we discuss all the pilots that we're doing. So there are several pilots at this point. The supply chains, EV battery pack traceability upstream and downstream. There's the floor plan audit, tailpipe emissions, which was discussed also, and then the transit idea program, which is funded by FDA for multimodal transit. With regards to like what's coming next, what is interesting, the reason we did a supply chain pilot, and we're right now focused at a very basic layer of supply chain track and trace, which is really the identity and the application of trusted trip in terms of verifiable credentials, and how those credentials are tossed around between different stakeholders as those parts, the EV battery, especially EV battery pack, moves from one stakeholder to another stakeholder for various purposes. So once we have that built, then we can layer lots of other specific use cases on top of it. Recall being one of them, emissions being another one, carbon footprint and ESG, environment, social and governance related aspects that requires that track and trace. So we will continue to include look at emissions and carbon footprint and ESG, also because of the fact that we are actively looking at the EU's battery directive proposal that, if enacted, will come into force as early as July 2024, which requires battery suppliers and auto manufacturers to have recycling targets, collection targets, and ESG requirements. So for that, the fundamental layer to do all of that is the basic track and trace, and that's what we're working on. Back to you, Kelly.
So thank you. We went through all of our submitted questions, so we can now shift over to questions that we received in the chat. And again, as a reminder to everyone, please feel free to keep submitting questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So our first question is, On the topic of European activities, how are things going with the European Commission pilot? Is there more plans for work or growth in the EU?
Thanks. So I think that question was partially answered. We'll continue to work with the EU Commission on many of their initiatives. So be able to issue identity and manage it was the first step. The next step will probably be tailpipe emission and battery, the battery directive that Rajat mentioned. So we'll keep you updated. If you get on our mailing list, you will hear more than enough about them. I promise.
Great. So our next question is the scope and scale of the standards more European focused rather than North American?
Rajat, you want to take that?
We're market agnostic at this point. We do have lots of members from Europe, and we do actually have lots of members from Japan as well. But certainly lots of members from North America. So we want to, our intention is to keep it region agnostic.
Yes, and also, even though we've been talking about EU, we'll announce it soon, but recently we got a small, tiny grant. You can see it as a seed grant in the US to get the mass and multimodal concept, start building that out. So we'll announce that also soon.
That was NSF and I forget the name of the, Rajat, you would know, the organization that administers the transportation grants for the DOT.
Yeah, SBIR, the Small Business Innovation Research.
No, I was thinking of a different one. But anyway, so to answer the question about the nature of our standards, so MOBI is a global organization. Roughly 1/3 of our members are in Asia, 1/3 in Europe, and 1/3 in the Americas. So, you know, even though there's a handful of us who are based in Los Angeles or in the US, our members are global. We actually have staff all over the world as well. Our development team is in Central Asia. We have board members in Japan, others in the US, and so on, and a lot of activities in the EU. So we're modern, global, member-driven organization.
We are decentralized organization.
Right, so our next question about implementation. Where do you currently see the first implementation of the MOBI framework, and will that implementation allow for other members of the ecosystem?
So the framework, I guess you are talking about mobiNET and Citopia, is that correct? And MOBI standards. So we actively working on multiple projects. We call it parts tracks, and that's in our supply chain. Rajat can talk a lot about it, I'm sure. And that is right now, the initial case is EV battery track and trace. And then we have the VIN track, which is vehicle tracking for dealer floor plan. But that is just the first step in opening up many securitization use cases. And then the mass multimodal use case that we are about to embark also this year. So we'll continue to keep you up to date. Did that answer the question?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Great. So our next question is, do you plan to issue DAO tokens to allow MOBI members to participate in governance?
So DAO tokens. So right now, what we've got in the network is node operators have equal votes. So essentially, they're the DAO. Is a DAO, you know, out of the question? No, I think you know, there's lots of interesting things about DAOs as governance mechanisms. I think at this point they're pretty immature. Remember, corporate governance has had 400 years of development and legal structures and testing in courts. So we know kind of how that all works. So we set up mobiNET and the ITN, or setting it up as a traditional corporate structure, but the control is more DAO-like because it's majority vote of the node operator rather than the equity shareholders. So it's kind of a hybrid. And I think that as DAO governance evolves and proves successful, it would be logical to transition the network more in that direction. So I just want to call out, I think this question is coming from Sunil Paul. For those of you who don't know Sunil, Sunil is a serial entrepreneur who really pioneered the rideshare ride hailing industry, predating Uber and Lyft. Sold his company to GM several years ago. But basically everything you see in the Uber and Lyft apps was pioneered by Sunil and his colleagues. So thanks for joining us, Sunil.
So Neil, why don't you, I saw the next question you have is a note operator. Come to our mobiNET meetings, and that's where we talk about the network and what's going on there, so that you can get up to speed, and then we can talk with our development team.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Actually, even though I knew about some of these other things, it's helpful to hear about them. I think there's several fronts that we'll want to get more involved in.
Okay, good. I saw another question, which I think we should talk real quick. So Oki from Kaula, I'm surprised that you can't get to stuff because some of our members complain that they get too much emailing from us. So if you're a member, you can reach out to us directly. You should have access to standards. Our standards are living standards. So we actually will be able to share them with you. And so please contact us. And then the working groups, the same thing. Right now we have supply chain, we have the drive program, we have mobiNET, whichever you want to join, and the finance, securitization, and smart contract. And all those should have been listed out in the welcome email. And you should be able to reply to the welcome email, which Grace sends them out, and be able to join all these working groups. So we are very easy to get in touch with. And Kelly and Grace posted their email address all the time. So
we'll follow up with you. But more generally, for anybody who is struggling to get access to either standards or working groups and is a MOBI member, something is wrong. Reach out to us. We'll get you connected. Some of the working groups standards you have to be given access to. But remember, MOBI is the subject matter experts, right, of our members who drive the standards, who drive the working groups, who drive the pilots. So we want our members to be actively involved. We want our members to be coming to the weekly meetings and participating and reviewing the standards. We need that to be successful. This is not really about the technology, blockchain, distributed ledger. It's about the community. And so it's the community that makes it strong. So if you are finding you don't have the access you want, please let us know. Something is wrong and we'll fix it.
Great, thank you. So we have another question here about membership. Are there government agency members or only industry members?
we do. We have EU Commission, for example. We have organ DOT. So we do. We welcome government because at the end of the day, if we can do all these exciting things, but if there's no government buy-in or mandate, we'll not be able to do any of these wonderful things.
The Highway and Transit Research Institute in China.
So yes.
People's Republic.
So yes, we do work with government agency, as you can see from the pilots we're working on.
Great. So I think those are all of our chat questions. If anyone has any additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
I think we had a question on how members join working groups. And the answer is, I think we kind of answered it, but just let us know. And we want you to be in the working group if you have interest.
Great. So I think those are all the questions we have.
Do you mind if I just ask a question?
Sure.
How would we actually get, if we wanted to actually start doing a project, is that possible today? In other words, if we wanted to actually start an implementation based on one of these, How would we do that?
On the standards?
No, an actual operating, even if it's prototype.
So you want to do, you're interested in doing a multi-party pilot with the community for some use case.
Right.
And can you share the use case a little bit?
Yeah, I think it'd be on top of the battery tracking and the loan securitization. I mean, what we're doing is a fintech company, so the whole securitization and keeping track of the battery is of interest.
Okay, so you're securitizing based on cash flow or savings from EV operating costs.
Right, that's right.
Okay, yeah. It fits very well with some of the work that we're doing with the EVGI standard and with the batteries track and trace, share and charge, and state of health in the drives program. Rajat, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about the pilot, the battery work that we've done in drives and how another project could be layered in?
Yeah, so the supply chain working group, the EV battery pack traceability, track and trace, upstream and downstream. So right now we're at the stage of what we call a full design requirement, and then the user journey and screen designs and all of the good stuff. So we do have multiple scenarios that we're going to program into. Obviously, we can't do all of that. The most basic one at this point is if you look at downstream supply of EV batteries, then you have a supplier receives a purchase order from an OEM, sends the battery pack to what actually creates a battery birth certificate and physically sends it to the OEM through a logistics provider. OEM receives it, does the receives not only the physical part but also advanced shipment notification, delivery notes, all of those existing documents, and then it's passed on to the dealers if it's related to replacement of those modules or packs. And ultimately, the car goes into the hands of the end user. In case of a recall or maintenance, it flows backwards. But there are nuances that we have to deal with when we're passing around the battery birth certificate, how those birth certificates are updated, and also how the birth certificates are related to the VIN, so vehicle birth certificate. For example, there are things like the OEM doesn't want the suppliers to know about the end users because they're not their customers. So we've mapped out the whole detailed workflow of that level of track and trace. But obviously there are lots of assumptions and simplifications. For example, the logistics provider, we're assuming it's just one company moving the shipment. That's typically not. Doesn't really need to happen. That doesn't really happen in the real world. Maybe several logistics companies involved, depending on where the shipment is actually going. So the implementation part of it, once the screen design is done, we'll do the identity part will be implemented, and the creation of certificates, the verified credential birth certificates will be done by the mobiNET infrastructure, which Tram and Chris mentioned. The other part of so this does not include integration with any of the ERP systems or production systems with OEMs and suppliers. So essentially, we're kind of simulating the whole.
Rajat,
workflow.
sorry,
yeah.
Can I just interrupt? It's just to ask the question. Do you have a test net up and going? Is there?
Yeah.
Because there's and so to be a node operator means to participate in the test.
Yes, there's documentation. Yeah, all the members have they can download the code repo.
Yeah, they need to pass the technical requirement first.
Yeah.
And I mean, the UI stuff kind of confuses me given the context of blockchain solution, but so you're building all that as well. But if we wanted to Like, there is an actual active operating blockchain for the trusted trip, or like, is it on top of Ethereum? Is it on top of Solana? Like, what's the current status of all that?
It's on top of Hyperledger Fabric right now.
Hyperledger, okay.
So there's you have all the documentation you need to run it in any of your cloud environment, AWS, Azure, what have you.
Got it.
So you become a node operator by doing simple npm type thing.
So
Thank you.
So Fabric is the first chain that we use, but we actually want to have multiple that will be able to utilize. So when you're a node operator, you have to be able to run the node for all these changes that later on we accept. So
yeah, the creation of DIDs and verifiable credential is W3C standard based. So whether you're in Fabric or somewhere else, it really doesn't matter.
All right. Any last thoughts before we end today?
So, Mr. Neal, maybe you could put your website into the chat so that people can visit you and see what you're doing, and maybe some members will reach out to you and can talk about use case or doing a shared pilot.
That's great. I included my email as well. Certainly anyone in this community is free to reach out.
Great, thank you. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you so much for your questions. We really appreciate it. And again, there's a ton of information on our website, dlt.mobi, and my email is just kelly@dlt.mobi. So as Tram said, we're always available for questions, clarifying anything, so be sure to reach out to us. And we have additional lectures coming up, also available on our lecture page on our website. And for all of our updates, please subscribe to our bulletin, which is dlt.mobi/bulletin. And thank you again.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.